You're listening to the Tony Steuer Podcast, where Tony interviews financial literacy advocates who are changing the conversation on money, so you can catch up on the latest trends and ideas in the world of financial literacy and education.
Welcome to the Tony Steuer Podcast. I'm pleased to be joined today by Michael Gilmore. Michael is the founder of the MAIA Awards and Inclusion Awards, as well as an author and a research director at MAIA Capital. Michael, welcome to the Tony Steuer Podcast. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thanks very much for having me on, Tony. This is a real pleasure. I'm looking forward to having a good chat about financial literacy and money and what we can do about it.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. I'm looking forward to it as well. So, as we get started, can you tell us a little bit about your origin story? How did you get started in financial literacy and financial wellness?
Yeah, it came about by accident. So one of the reasons I'm possibly more keen on financial literacy than most people who work in finance is because I didn't want to work in finance. That wasn't my goal. I was a writer, a postgrad researcher, studying economic history. And then I accidentally got a job in finance. And I thought I'd get like 3 months to learn what I was doing. And they said, start on Monday. So I went and got all the books. This is pre-internet days. So I went and got all the books I could find on learning about money. I remember one was called Pocketbook MBA. And I think the second one was I tried to get all the way through Ben Graham's Intelligent Investor. And I sort of just dived in. And before that, I had the same feeling, I think, about money and finance that lots of people do outside of it, which is it's all kind of scary that these people all wear suits and they want to keep us out and they use big words and they act with big egos, deliberately trying to frighten us. And I felt exactly those feelings. But once I got in, I spent this sort of couple of month period, and I remember it so clearly. I was learning very quickly. And I suddenly thought, actually, none of this is as hard as I thought it was before. And I remember thinking, okay, this is actually not that complicated, number one. Number two, it's really, really powerful. And I immediately felt, okay, I'm really grateful I'm learning this. I can see that I'm going to put things to work here for the rest of my life. But then this third emotion hit, which was anger. I was just incredibly angry that I'd spent, 12 years in K-12 education like everyone else, another 3 years in university. I'd even done some postgrad, full-time education, and no one had ever bothered to teach me any of this stuff. And I was like, that can't be right that we're still doing that to other kids today. And it was just like, and that anger maintains. It's like, I don't see school as being something we give to children. I see school as us taking their lives away. We take away 12 years of their lives. The one thing we could do is teach them about the one thing we know they're going to use when they get out. And it's just like, we know that for a fact. So that hit me then. And I promised myself at some point I would start to address this. And I've done that in a number of ways. I really started to ramp that up about 10 years ago here in Singapore, working with migrant workers. I was invited to work with migrant workers here. And they're such a great group to work with because they've left their families behind to earn more money. They want to send it home, but they also want to save it. And so I was working with groups there and seeing the psychologies that they were, or the habits they were trying to build, the psychology they were trying to use to do that. And that led to writing a book for them and a course for them, which then led to writing a book for my daughter, and then another book that I wrote last year. And that led eventually to thinking, I think I need to do something a bit bigger than books. And that's how all this came about.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's a great story. And it's interesting that you mentioned The Intelligent Investor. That's one of my favorite books, and listeners to the show have heard me mention the book. But what's interesting is that so many of my guests who are in the financial services industry bring up The Intelligent Investor. It's not necessarily the Bible of the financial services or investment industry, but
it's close.
Yeah.
I mean, Ben Graham invented everything we do. I mean, just today I was writing in my day job. I was writing about the companies we invest in, and and I'm there using margins, return on equity, price to book, all the stuff that Ben Graham looked at, got to be getting on for 100 years ago now. It's it is absolutely essential in the industry. I would always stress that if anyone's listening to this and going to go out and get The Intelligent Investor, there is one version, which is Ben's original words. Don't get that one. Get a revised one that's been written by someone in the last 20 years. So the language is a little bit easier.
Yeah, I would 100% share that recommendation. The original is a little bit impenetrable. It was actually one of my college textbooks. Fantastic book, though. Yeah. Definitely. So, as we talk, what inspired you? I mean, you talked about it a little bit so far, but what inspired you to start the Money Awareness and Inclusion Awards?
Yeah, I think it was really, there's a number of things. Let's cut it down to just two. The first thing was working on the books. And I was very lucky to be invited by Wiley, who published the book that I wrote for my daughter called Happy Ever After. And once I'd finished that, they invited me to write a book for their Little Book of series, which is an incredible privilege. I mean, considering that, the Little Book of Common Sense Investing is written by John Bogle, the Little Book of Valuation written by Aswath Damodaran, and then they came to me, and I was like, okay, that's quite amazing. So I have written that book now, and it just got published last week or 2 weeks ago. But as I was writing it, I had this thought process of, wouldn't it be amazing if that's a bestseller? And then a little voice, the kind of we do this thing in fund management where we have red team, blue teams, and we argue with each other and we argue with ourselves. And I engaged that arguing, saying, okay, but what would a bestseller mean? I was like, well, maybe that's 1 million copies. Oh, that would be amazing. Like the blue team thinks, and the red team's like, yeah, but what problem is that addressing in terms of financial literacy? What is the problem of financial literacy? How big is it? And I don't agree with the numbers that say that 2/3 of the world is financially illiterate. I think it's more like 99%, like on a real, can you invest? Do you know how you need to invest? I mean, the 1/3 of the world that's financially literate is using a very low bar. And I thought, okay, so really the whole world, we need to get the whole world. And what's 1 million copies out of the whole world? It's like 0.001%. And it's not even the 1% that really needs addressing. I mean, they're buying books. They're going to buy another book instead of mine. They're looking for a book on finance. We need to address a bigger problem than this. And so that was part of it. I was searching for an answer that would be a bigger answer than, another book. And then my younger daughter, is a film student. And before she went off to film college, she dragged me to the cinema. It was one of the last things we watched before she went off, was the Korean film Parasite. Now, it had just come out in Asia. No one had heard of it in America. No one had heard of it in the UK. When she got to film school, no one had heard of it there, not even the teachers. And she's like, but this is an amazing film. It could win an Oscar. And everyone's like, no, Korean films don't win Oscars. They might win the best foreign film. And of course, we now know that Parasite won the Oscar. But through last year, as I was really thinking through about developing the MAIAs, there was a phenomenon that the number 1 show on Netflix was a show called Squid Games. And Squid Games was a Korean post-apocalyptic or dysfunctional drama, very, very along the lines of Parasite. I think that win by Parasite didn't just change the box office numbers for Parasite. It did, but it changed the ecosystem. It changed what people thought. It changed what people were looking at, and that's huge. And I suddenly made me realize that what award shows can be. Because we all think of award shows as being an opportunity to pat each other on the back. So aren't I great? Let's look at famous people. But you realize they can actually be something that helps catalyze and create an ecosystem, a feedback loop where people know what's good, what they should work on, who's doing great work, who's, what areas they could focus in their own work, what they should do, and become a talking point, become something that brings things together. And that made me realize that when I look at the world of financial literacy, there's a lot of people like you and like me who think this is really important. And there's a lot of people who don't disagree with us, but don't hold it quite as strongly as us. And we need to catalyze that and bring it together and say, no more messing around, no more waiting 10 years to get this into a few schools here and there and debate whether it works. Let's not let any kids, go out of school now without learning this. Let's let everyone get out of school understanding money. And I thought the thing I could do is start an award show. Luckily, I have started one before. It was not very big, not very serious. It was just about raising money, but it had made me realize that no one owns awards. You can just create them. And as long as you take them seriously and you build them properly, then you can create something out of nothing. And that's what I'm trying to do with the MAIAs. And I've been very lucky to get some incredible support doing that.
Fantastic. Yeah, well, it's an exciting concept. And I think what's really important is the words in the title, money awareness, which we've discussed, and inclusion. Tell us a little bit about why you feel that inclusion is so important.
Yeah, because it's actually very much part of to me, financial literacy. People aren't being included. It's just with the way we've treated money so far is that if you get it, you get it, and if you don't, you don't. But what don't means is you're left out of the financial system in many ways. Even if you're in a developed country and you might be considered included in sort of, development economic terms, you might have a bank account, et cetera, but you might not be included in the stock market. You might have decided not to. You might be saving into a savings account or some other form. Inclusion goes into many ways, but it requires education. And there's actually, I'm glad you brought it up because they're also in a very specific order, because people have talked about financial inclusion a lot in the last 10 years, particularly in the developing world. To me, I think financial inclusion must come after financial education. Every non-American I speak to gets this joke, but I'm going to test this with an American now, which is, having financial inclusion without financial education is like having gun inclusion without gun education. You wouldn't want that. You wouldn't want to kind of run around throwing guns at people without any education on how to use them. If you do that with financial inclusion, you will get very expensive debt running through that economy. And we see it right now across the world with BNPL sprouting everywhere because fintech is out there saying, I've got this great thing and all these people are going to come in and use my wallets. And they do use the wallets and they don't make any money. So then they start lending them money at really high rates. And until you've educated people to say, well, only when you really need it should you be taking that debt. And when I say really need it, going to die if you don't take that debt. That's when you take really high debt. Otherwise, you don't take high price debt. And that's the level of education that just is lacking. People take high price debt because they see something they like online. And that's where we need to build that in all kinds of ways.
Definitely. Well, you said a couple things in there that I think are important. Well, one, I want to clarify for everybody who's listening, BNPL is buy now, pay later. And as you mentioned, it's a very catchy trend, especially promoted by fintechs. I think PayPal has been pushing it quite a bit. And it's a form of a loan. As you talk about, it's a very expensive form of debt. Sometimes, I think, quite a bit higher even than credit cards, right? On some of the terms.
It can be. It depends on the structure. Yeah, it can be. But it's very opaque. All the structures are very opaque, and they like it that way because the people then borrow more.
Definitely. And I like the gun analogy. However, unfortunately, in the US, there's quite the gun culture. So
yeah,
we definitely want to stay away from that topic. But I think everybody can agree that a little education is important before you hand somebody a firearm. It's just a good course of action, no matter where you stand on the spectrum of firearms.
Exactly. Education before inclusion. And that's where we went. And that's why we went with the structure, money awareness. We also didn't use the word financial literacy or the words financial literacy because we feel that they're just in their terminology, they're a bit exclusionary. And again, it's just like, are we saying to people, well, no, number one, if you talk about finance, half of your audience just blanks. they've been preconditioned to think they don't understand it. And if you're, that is that their fault? Maybe. But if I'm in sales, and this is another thing that I hope we do with the MAIAs, is encourage people to take, in our world, to take on a more sales approach. We want to sell to people. We don't want to teach them. Teaching can mean I just talk, you listen, and if you didn't listen very well, you get a low grade. No, I want to sell to people. I want to sell to them the idea that they can understand money better and then change their lives. And then, because then if I don't sell well, it is my fault. And I have to bring that to the game a little bit. And that's where we don't use the word finance, we use money, and we use awareness, because it's not literacy, it's really just an understanding of what's around us. And it also incorporates that sort of concept of mindfulness. Now, we're not going to get all meditation-y on this, but awareness and mindfulness of what we spend and what we do with our money is crucial to the whole message.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's a great point. I've gotten away from the term financial literacy, but more because I think literacy in itself can be an intimidating word that most people are not familiar with. However, that's an intriguing point about the word financial, because as I talk about financial wellness, I hadn't thought about that even financial wellness may be unapproachable for some people, as you mentioned. I don't know if we can call it money wellness, because that doesn't sound quite right either. But that's the kind of thing that people in marketing would do. I mean, really good advertising, they would sit down there and they go to what 100 terms could we use, which ones would work, where wouldn't they work. I had a conversation with someone a while back, and they're talking about how do we get young people to understand and start taking up pensions much younger, because they need to. And I was like, what? Stop calling them pensions. It's your fault. Everyone knows a pension is a thing you draw down when you're old. It's a thing for old people. You cannot educate people away from that mentality. That's what the word means. You need to give your product a new name. That's what marketing does. If someone associates with that, you move the thing. So call it a freedom fund. Tell people they'll be free when they have this much money. Tell them that's what they're saving for. And you'll find 20-year-olds will say, I'm saving to be free. Yeah, I'm in. Right? Rather than I'm saving to be old. No, that's what they think a pension is. I save up and I'll get to be old one day. It's like, I'm not going to do it. And that's where we have to constantly think. And this is one of the things that's actually in the MAIA's structure, as we try to talk to the organizations about where they're innovating and how they're communicating with specific communities. Because that's what we want to see. We want to see more of that thought process on really understanding who the community is they're talking to, and how they've understood them and how they've engaged with them. No, that's a great point. So, as we start to wrap up, I want to make sure we really talk about the awards themselves and how people, can support the awards. Maybe tell us a little bit about the categories and, the ceremony, a little bit of the, I guess, procedural.
Yeah, the ceremony. That's going to be on May 31st. I'm going to be right here, because it's going to be online, and I'm going to be looking into my laptop screen as I am right now. But we're very lucky that we've got as a host for the evening, we've got a lady called Jeanette, she's worked for Sky News and BBC News as an anchor, and she's agreed to anchor the event for us. So I'll be one of the guests that she's bringing on to talk about it. And then we'll also have Patrick Jenkins, who's the deputy editor of the Financial Times, and also the chair of their financial literacy and inclusion campaign that they launched, I think, beginning of last year or just a little bit earlier than that. And then we have, I think our third and fourth guests are Professor David Fernandez from the Singapore Management University, who's the head of the Asia Pacific Financial Education Institute. I always have to try and remember that one. It's quite a long one. And then we have a fintech entrepreneur, lady called Rosalia Gitau, who runs a fintech that's aimed at women in developing countries. And she's and so Dave and Patrick and Rosalia were three of our judges. So we had 11 judges in total, coming from a range of different backgrounds. As you can hear, we've got a fintech lady, we've got a financial journalist and a professor in there. But we also had influencers. We had some more fintech business people. We had a couple of fund managers in there. So we had a really nice range of people who use money to communicate, and they're very engaged in financial education and financial literacy. So that was the first thing we had to do, was sort of pull together that judging panel. And they've been in their own ways and in their own places judging the awards that came, the entries that came in. We had about 150 total entries that came in into, I think initially we had about 15 categories, but we've actually kind of got rid of some and reallocated some entries. So we're going to come out, I think, with sort of 11 different categories. There's some pretty simple ones, like, the best book and the best influencer, but also there's some more sort of specific industry type ones. So we've got things like, the best non-profit working with school-aged children, but also best non-profit working with adult education. We have some really interesting entries that we've seen come in, from places like, as far apart as stuff here in Singapore, in my home, but all the way to Peru, in Ghana, in the UK, in the US, to really a very global representation in all these different categories. And so the 150 is now being whittled down. I think we're down to about 40 finalists across all the different categories that we have at the moment. And we're hoping that we come out of that with 11 winners by May 31st that we can announce then. So yeah, they're from all over the place. And I've seen every single entry, and it's just fascinating what people are doing in different places. And what I hope we all get from this is we all get involved in I think even if you didn't enter and even if you didn't win, to actually see this as this is somewhere we can learn about what other people are doing on this subject matter. Are they doing it well? Are they doing it badly? If we think they're doing it badly, we can get involved and say, look, I can help you. I've got these materials that I think you could improve yours. Or if they're doing it well, say, look, can you mentor me? I'd like to see what you're doing. A really good example of something that's come out of this is, I was on the phone with someone from an organization in Australia who's working to get financial literacy put into schools in Cambodia, which is a great project. And because they want to aim at getting it into every school in the whole of Cambodia within a 5-year timeframe. And I had just 3 weeks before had a conversation with someone from Hong Kong who'd introduced me to someone in Zambia, who is getting financial literacy into every school in Zambia across every age group. And they're negotiating with the government right now how to do that. And Zambia might be the only country in the world in the next couple of years that has it in every classroom, which it would be incredible for Zambia. But that level of connectivity in those conversations, I feel we lack in our industry as financial literacy. And that's what I want to bring to this, is so that everyone can come to this. So, it's supporting the MAIAs just reading what, our entries do. It's supporting us by entering. It's supporting us by, interconnecting, telling people about it, saying, if you've got friends, anyone watching this has got a friend who's doing some kind of project that's in financial literacy, say to them, okay, you missed this year, but get in for next year. Because the more entries we get, the more acknowledgement that those entries get, the more people see what's going on, feel, talk about it, understand. The bigger we can make this community, the more pressure we can bring to make sure that we are teaching everyone, whether it's kids, which it has to be, I think, first, but everyone's catch up and that everyone starts to understand money properly.
That sounds great. Because as you mentioned, it is interesting that Africa is one of the countries, continents, I guess, that financial literacy is really had some significant momentum. Ghana, Kenya, Zambia, South Africa, they're big financial literacy movements that it's really caught on, which is really amazing over some quote unquote industrialized countries that you might think would be further ahead.
Well, I think what's happened is that there's been a realization globally, there's lots of people like us, Tony, who are realizing not only have we been left behind, but people today are getting left further and further behind. Finance isn't getting simpler, and it never will. So unless we start learning the basics today and teaching everyone the basics, people are going to be left massively behind. And I think that's more obvious in emerging countries. And so the people that get it are saying, okay, I can help people as well for almost no money. I mean, handouts are handouts, and they are necessary in some places and in some situations. And that, financial literacy isn't going to solve poverty on its own, but there are some situations where financial literacy is really making it a lot worse. And that to me is we need both of those solutions. And I think it's more obvious in really poor countries that you need both. You need to teach people what to do with their money so they can make more optimal decisions. So I do think it's very interesting. Rosalia, who I mentioned earlier on as one of our judges, she is friends with a lady now in Nigeria who is making a series on financial literacy for Netflix that will become global in the next year or so.
Wow, that's amazing.
I know, right? I mean, but it's so big in Nigeria, and this woman is so popular that the Netflix said, "Yeah, we want you to make a series about learning how to use your money, how to use it well," and Netflix is financing that. So there is definitely the demand for it, and there's the supply for it. But at the moment, there's no marketplace enabling it to meet. And that's what I'm not suggesting we can become that marketplace, but what the MAIAs can hopefully do is catalyze some better connections and make sure that we all have better information so we can be a bit more efficient. I know when I wrote the first things I wrote on financial literacy, I thought I'd invented a wheel. And I think a lot of people go through that process. And so I was like, oh, look at that. Look what I've just done. And then you realize, oh, other people have done this. Okay. But we could reduce that. We could start standing on each other's shoulders a little bit and say, look, money's not very complicated. Take that back. It's not complex, it is complicated. Complex being something that's actually really hard to understand from the beginning, but complicated things are like an amalgamation of simple things. So most things in money can actually be understood quite simply. And the problem is they just need to get layered on and layered on. So it's a question of small steps. And that's what I think we can do. We need to just start that process, get people involved in the early stages. Yeah, and that's what I hope we can get done. And that's what and as I said, it's not the MAIAs getting it done. What I hope we can do is we can encourage more people to do it and to see better work, and that our winners will do it.
Definitely. Well, it sparks more conversations, and as you point out, that's what one of the things I'm concentrating on is helping to connect and raise up the profiles of other people who are doing financial education work. So, Michael, as we wrap up, what is your number one tip on financial wellness?
Yeah, for me, it's about understanding. It's taking small, simple steps. The analogy that I've used in the most recent book, which is the little book of Zen Money, is that the understanding money is like a path. And I think when we think of the analogy of a path, a lot of us think of sidewalk or a concrete path. But actually, I think of it as coming from the countryside in the UK as one of those countryside paths which is just across a field. And really, when you're at the beginning of the path and you look across the field, you can see the path because it's just trodden down grass. It's just that grass is just bent over a little bit more, and it reflects the sun in a slightly different way, and you know exactly where it is. If you kind of come in at the side, it's invisible. It's not reflecting any light back at you at all. It's just gone. The path disappears. And it's the importance of actually understanding that when you're on the path, you can see the path. And so the importance of just taking really small incremental steps wherever you are on that path. So if, for example, you've never saved before in your life and you think you can't save $1 in whatever frequency you need to do to make it a regular habit, saving that $1 and doing the thing which is all important, saving it first, not refuse to accept that people can save at the end of the month. That's not saving. That is accidental not spending. You save it at the beginning of the month. That kind of small step, and whatever it is, can then build through small steps into the ability to know how to understand, to understand how to invest and build a portfolio and build a financial security. But they're small steps, and they have to be small, because too often, because we don't teach it well, we say to someone who doesn't know about saving incrementally and budgeting and planning and tracking, we say to them, oh, what you need to do is this tax advantage scheme here for self-employed people. And they're looking at you going, well, they don't know how to save. There's no point. They're coming at the path from the side. So to me, it's about really small steps and getting at the beginning of the path, knowing where you're, and then taking small incremental steps forward. That to me is the biggest tip, because other things take you off the path and you don't know where you are.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I love that. Incremental steps, at your own pace. So yeah. Michael, where can people learn more about you? And of course, where can they learn more about the MAIA Awards?
Thanks. Yeah, Tony. So our website is MAIAwards.org. So that's MAI Awards.org. And we tend to be quite focused on LinkedIn. If you look at the Money Awareness and Inclusion Awards on LinkedIn at the moment, although it's starting to spread into some of the other social media, into Instagram and Twitter, and a little bit on Facebook. In the second half of this year, after the awards have been announced, one of the prizes that we will be giving to the winners and the finalists is we'll be doing podcasts with them and interviews with them, and there'll be a lot of content to find out about who the winners are and what they do. And so you'll find all of those on the social media as well. But they will also be on that website, MAIAwards.org.
Fantastic. And for all the listeners and viewers, those links will be on the website in the show notes. So you can access it there. So Michael, thank you very much for joining us on the Tony Steuer Podcast.
It's been a real pleasure. And Tony, thank you for doing this. I absolutely love that you do this. And I love how actually people in financial literacy do all want to work together. I think it's one of the best things about, none of us are competing. We all know that we're all working together the moment we talk to each other. So thank you very much for doing this and inviting me on.
Well, you as well. Thanks for taking us on. And I agree with you. As I think in the financial education, financial literacy, whatever word we choose, is that there is this feeling that we're in this together, and that, coming together, we can be more powerful than traveling our own paths. So
yeah,
100%.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thanks very much,
and
Tony.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you everyone for tuning in to the Tony Steuer Podcast. Until next time.